Let me see. Let me see if you're muted in there. Yeah, you are muted.
Hope you can hear us. So this work is co-authored with my colleagues Jonathan Pinckney from the University of Texas at Dallas, and also with Jawhara Kanu, who is a senior program officer at the U.S. Institute of Peace. There are three motivations for this project. The first one is the rise in authoritarianism, as you can see in this figure from Freedom House. The past 16 years, we have seen a democratic decline, and we know that nonviolent resistance can be, and civil society in general, is really one of the bulwarks of democracy and trying to stop authoritarianism and dictatorship from the grassroots up. The second motivation is really two patterns that we're seeing more recently in the world. One is the rise in protests and kind of mass mobilization. As you can see from this work by Erica Chenoweth from 2020, in the past few years, we've seen a dramatic increase in protests around the world. But at the same time, as you can see in the figure on your right, we are seeing a decline in the success rate of nonviolent movements. So the question related to training is, can civic capacity, building civic capacity, really enable movements to become more effective, given that we know that part of the reason why this decline is happening is because it's much easier to mobilize masses of people more quickly, given social digital technologies, and the fact that there hasn't been a need to be able to develop these infrastructures, the organizing infrastructures that you need to sustain movements. And so the capacity building is part of that building of the organizational capacity, organizational infrastructure that you might need for resilience, and not just starting a project but actually sustaining it and succeeding. And then finally, the third motivation has to do with the fact that trainings for civil society and kind of leadership trainings and civic capacity and action is amongst the most common interventions for democracy promotion, not just from governments in the Western world, but also from international organizations and from non-governmental organizations. And I just put a few of the logos of the ones that I know the most that do specifically the type of training that we're analyzing, examining the impact on, like the International Center on Nonviolent Conflict, like Canvas, RISE, the Albert Einstein Institution, Leading Change Network, and of course, the U.S. Institute of Peace will be the one that I'll be looking at today. But in general, these trainings have a lot of overlap and commonalities. They tend to focus on training activists on first understanding the impact or the most cutting edge knowledge in the field, in the literature. Also getting activists to learn about lessons learned from other conflicts and other nonviolent movements, and giving them a very large toolbox and diverse toolbox for strategic planning and strategic and conflict analysis for movements. And then building up the skills and the ability to do peace building tools. So not just confrontational intention in nonviolent action, but also the peace building side, such as dialogue, mediation, and negotiation, because that's also needed for interim movement building. So kind of solving some of the factions that may happen within a movement, but also creating more allies cross-sectorally, which is really important for nonviolent movements. And also in the end, if you kind of have success, to be able to negotiate with the others. So from those three motivations, the main two research questions of this project are, can nonviolent action campaigns become more effective if they devote more time and resources to train activists? And more specifically, what is the effect of training activist leaders in strategic nonviolent action? And so this article in particular has much more of an empirical contribution to make. But it does, I did want to outline some of the kind of theoretical frameworks that we're working with, but there is so much to explore in these theories of how a training might impact the attitudes, the ideas, and the behaviors of activists, and how they change groups, and how we can see macro level change. But this basically the idea in literature, I think, is that participating in a training on strategic nonviolent action is expected to have effects on three main areas: on strategy and tactics, organizational practices, and movement unity and composition. So on strategy, we think that learning about strategic nonviolent action and how it works and the lessons learned might reduce the willingness to engage in violence and increase support for nonviolent action. We also might expect an increased probability that groups that were not engaging in strategic planning, once they get these tools, are going to analyze conflicts in a different way and kind of systematically analyze the movement before acting. And then by developing these skills on peace building, dialogue, mediation, negotiation, we might, and explaining how important it is to have unity and kind of cross-sectoral unity in particular, we might see a more united movement and also more coalitions emerge from these trainings. And so then the question becomes, if these changes actually happen, how do they connect to kind of movement effectiveness? And so we know, and this really taking from what we know of how nonviolent action works, so that we know that, for example, mass participation and defections are really important for success, and both mass participation and defections are likely if you have more nonviolent discipline or if you use nonviolent action than armed action. We also know that cross-cutting alliances are very important to reduce repression and also to increase defection. We also know that nonviolent discipline is important to reduce the likelihood and intensity of repression. And we also know from other work that high levels of repression make mass mobilization really difficult and risky and unlikely. So from these, if you might have seen in the pre-analysis plan, we have so many different hypotheses because the training is it's a 5-day immersive training on nonviolent action. It's a very compound treatment, and we expect to see many different effects. But basically, I'm going to outline just about 7 or 8 hypotheses here that have to do with these this theoretical frame. We expect to see a decreased support of the use of violence, an increase in the perception that nonviolent action is effective, a reduction in the actual behavioral use of violence by activists in protest, a reduction in state repression if it's true that nonviolent action makes state repression less likely, and then increased confidence in the use of these tools that we teach, and an increase not just in the confidence but actually in using them, so developing practices organizationally, and then eventually seeing higher levels of participation rates and first participation. All right, so now getting into the research design and the data collection. So we conducted a field experiment in Sudan where we trained more than 1,800 community leaders and activists in 96 municipalities. And we trained them in the SNAP training guide. It's synergizing nonviolent action and peace building. So it's really bringing together the confrontational contention aspect of nonviolent action along with the peace building side, and synergizing it, meaning that depending on the moment in the movement and what the objectives are, you might think about strategically which one to use when, how to sequence it. And so this is a 5-day workshop where we teach all of these things, and they were, I'll go into exactly, I can speak about why Sudan in particular. Maybe I'll say just a few things there. We can talk more about the Q&A. But basically, we started this project at a time after the December revolution with the ousting of Bashir. And we thought that it was really an important to maintain kind of the mobilization at a time when there was a transition, and to ensure that there would be a stronger democratic position. And we also saw some elements of the neighborhood resistance committees kind of saying that we needed these trainings on the ground locally to be able to manage, especially youth, kind of the youth revolutionary intensity, to be able to bring them to strategic thinking, as well as at the very local level to be able to solve conflicts peacefully, because a lot of the conflicts very at the local level, they're about territorial disputes and that generally solved through violence. And so all of those components made it that, we had lots of conversations with our partners there in Sudan, and there was a lot of buy-in for this project. In terms of the process of launching this project, very in basic terms, we map civil society actors and movements in order to be able to actually select a facilitator pool. So the people who are actually going to do the training on the ground to all the participants, they are from Sudan and from all of these communities. And it was really important for us to then have a wide range of people who could do this in different parts of the country, to be able to go to their communities and tap into their networks to be able to teach SNAP. And so the training, then we had, once we selected this cohort of 25 facilitators, Sudanese facilitators, then we trained them in a training of trainers. So you train them in SNAP, and then you have an extended period of training on facilitation skills, etc. And then we have a process of about 2 months where the research team interacts with the facilitators to do a co-design process of the actual research, because the research is separate from the actual intervention of teaching SNAP. And so we developed the research design alongside the tools, the measurement tools alongside the facilitators here. And then they start the mapping of the areas where they want to do the work. And then we incorporate the randomization aspect that I'll describe in a moment. And then they start recruiting people and training them. All right, so as I said, we trained 25 facilitators in November 2020. And they, through this co-design process, they identified 13 priority states. And so this is really interesting. Actually, initially, we were at the research teams, and USIP was advocating for training lots of people in Khartoum, in the capital city, for obvious reasons, a lot of dissenters and protests, etc. But they said that, a lot of people get trained in Khartoum, a lot of access to international organizations and kind of these opportunities. And so they wanted to reach very rural communities, areas where these capacity building trainings are very rare, if they've ever been there, places with lack of electricity, lack of internet, sure. And so, this required resources, but we thought that it was, the right way to go given the co-design process. And so these 13 states do not include the capital city in Sudan. From these 13 states, there are 38 municipalities. And given some power analysis, we decided that if we could get 80% power with 96 workshops. And so we divided we took 96 municipalities from these 138 to further narrow them down. I'll explain how we kind of did the randomization. The process was that these 96 municipalities, we try to match them pairs on observables. And then to randomize from the pair, which one would receive the training and which one would be in the control group immediately. The thing is to note is that the control groups, the control municipalities, will receive the SNAP training in the future. For ethical reasons, we thought that if they participated in the surveys and all these things, that we would train them in the future. So it's just a period of time when they serve as a control group. And so these, we gathered 3 sources of data. One is the population density, the protests and the violence patterns from the past from ACLED, and then nightlight emissions, because we really struggled to find the good municipality level development data on Sudan. And so this was the best we could do. And so we matched the pairs on those 3 covariates and then randomized which one would be in the treatment, which would be control. And this is basically the randomization how it could happen. These are the localities that received the treatment and the control, and the ones that were not included. We also didn't just, so this process of co-design made sure that we didn't include states that are too dangerous to conduct the study that our facilitators didn't win. We also excluded areas, for example, that facilitators didn't have connections on the ground. This would be unfeasible or insecure. And so those are some of the considerations that. In terms of sources of data to be able to observe any changes, if there are any, we have 3 sources of data in Sudan. One is the survey, and we have for the treatment group with 3 surveys: the pre-workshop survey that they take immediately as they're going into the workshop, one that happens immediately after finishing the 5-day workshop in person, And then one that was the follow-up survey that we wanted to conduct 8 to 12 months after the workshop. And this one, unfortunately, we were not able to, we were only able to do about 120 of these follow-up surveys, given the outbreak of the war in April this year. Then we thought that, you know, in addition to the survey, we wanted to have behavioral measures of change. We wanted to see if this was actually changing anything at the macro level, behavioral level. And we debated a lot with the facilitators to see what was the best source of data that we could have for this. In other countries where we're doing this, we use Twitter, for example. In Venezuela, people use Twitter a lot, and so we're using Twitter there. You know, in Nicaragua, we're using a data set that a colleague of us coded, extremely good event data set. But in this case, we felt like newspapers would not be good enough, certainly not digital media or social media. We had workshops with no electricity, and people took the surveys on paper. And so we decided to build a network of citizen journalists across the treatment and control municipalities. And the way we did this is we made sure that these citizen journalists did not know if they were in a control treatment municipality. And we called them up once a month to ask them questions about any actions and events and repression that happened in their communities. And we gathered data that way to be able to compare behavioral changes. And then we conducted 26 interviews, in-depth interviews with the participants of the training, and obviously a lot of interaction and kind of qualitative data from the facilitators and their insights. All right, this is just to give you a sense of pictures of how the training looked. Blocking people's faces just because of security reasons, but these are that's a picture of the survey that was taken on paper first, and then all tricks to be able to analyze. And in terms of timeline, we trained the trainers, so training of trainers took place in November 2020. From December 2020 to January 2021, we did the co-design process that I described. And then February to November of 2021, we did treatment group workshops. March 2022 to June 2022, we did the control group workshops. So we wanted some lag between the treatment workshops and the control, so we could still observe the citizen journalist data with that comparison before we trained the control. And then February to April of this year, we started the follow-up survey, and we could not finish it. Okay, this is getting into the results now. So I wanted to give you first a sense of what the distribution of the data looks like for one of the outcome variables of the survey. And so here's the distribution of the baseline and the post-training on the question when we asked activists, are you, how much would you agree that is important to keep the option of violence in your struggle? And we see here that post-training, so in the gold, you see a higher percentage, about a 13-point difference in the percentage of people saying that they disagree with keeping the option of violence. And so that's just to give you an example. A lot of the kind of means that I'll show you in a second are going to have this 5-point distribution of strongly disagree to strongly agree. So you get a sense of that range, that even a variable is just the 5-point. And here's more results. So that's the one on the left is the same one that I just showed you, the option to retain violence. Post-training, you see a reduction, statistically significant reduction in the people saying that we have to retain the option of violence and not struggle. We also see a statistically significant reduction in people reporting that the movement should use violence. So this is asking kind of indirect questions about violence, because we thought that it was unethical to ask them directly if they would engage in violence, but we asked the question, would you support your movement using violence for your struggle? And there's a statistically significant reduction after some of that. We see at the 90th percentile, so not 95th, we have a statistically significant difference in nonviolent discipline. So people reporting after SNAP that it is important to maintain nonviolent discipline to achieve success in the movement. And then we also see that in terms of kind of, we give them lessons learned, and we also have we tell them about the recent literature that shows that nonviolent action is more effective than transaction journalist work. And so this shows that people do kind of take that information and report that they think that nonviolent struggle is more effective post-training, and that specifically we have the biggest increase is in nonviolent action is most effective against repression, which is really interesting, I think. And then, so we also have questions in the survey about confidence, self-confidence and group confidence. And the questions are around things like asking them, do you think that, what is your ability to solve problems regarding your political struggles? And very general like that. First, we wanted to get a sense of just, does now increase self-confidence and group confidence? We don't find that has an effect on just this general idea that you can change your society. We don't see that. However, we do see a dramatic increase in people's reported confidence in using the specific tools and skills that they developed in the training. And so, for example, develop the ability to develop a strategic plan, sequencing nonviolent action and peace building. It increases post-training. We also see that people have more confidence in developing a mission and a vision, for the work that organizes their work. So we see a really big increase there. Also, interestingly, on the peace building skills, because a lot of these the people that we trained, we found they tended to be more on the activist side. People who participated in the December movement were neighborhood associations that were either doing more confrontational work, and they lacked more on the peace building side, and so they report more confidence in doing dialogue and active listening to solve problems in their work. The last one is on conflict analysis, and then even dialogue and increase and statistically significant increase in both dialogue and active listening, confidence that you can do it with allies as well as people that they disagree with or adversaries.
This is all relative to the same people being surveyed.
Yeah.
To the control.
Okay, so yeah, no, it's the control too. So okay. Let me just go back to show you here. So the control group only takes the baseline survey, and the treatment takes we're comparing here the baseline and the post-treatment. So what I'm doing in that analysis, although I have other variations, is combine the baseline of the control and the treatment and compare it to the post-treatment. So I also do just comparing the treatment group pre and post. But I think that it's to leverage the kind of the experimental side. I combine the baseline and the control and the treatment to compare to.
More generally, did anything happen in the control group? What is your control? I'm not very.
Okay, good, yeah. So the control group area, I didn't share this part, but basically these are half of the 96 municipalities that are mines, and when we went in to do the trainings for the areas that were chosen as the treatment group, we had the facilitators also go into the control group areas, the municipalities, and recruit the people that would be trained in the future. So actually, it's not really just a control group of not receiving any attention from us. It's sort of a kind of a milder intervention. So the facilitators, these facilitators, the same ones, went into these communities. They follow the same process of recruitment, which is talking to the community leaders, making sure that there was a group of people, kind of the community leaders that wanted to train in nonviolent action and peace building, that they would be interested in this. They held a meeting together to discuss the future training, and they gave them the baseline survey.
There would be hopeful that's built into the control group that might not be in the experiment.
Yeah. Yeah, the expectations that they would receive the training. Yeah. And the other one would be receiving the training.
Even beyond,
What do you mean?
even beyond simply receiving training, but just for the training must be different as a result of actually having to experience.
Yeah, maybe. Okay, so let's see. So now this is the figure on the citizen journalist data. So trying to look at, we wanted to see if we had any behavioral changes. We don't find any changes in they're all in the right direction, quote unquote, the expected direction. but the ones that are not statistically significant are concessions. So we don't see a statistically significant increase in concessions from the state, from these local struggles. We don't see a statistically significant decrease in non-state violence. So these organizing committees and groups on the ground, they're not exhibiting in the events that they put out kind of a statistically significant reduction in violence. Although we do see a statistically significant decrease in state violence that we observed compared to the control and the treatment areas. And we also see, interestingly, that we see a reduction in the percentage of events that are kind of demanding a lot of different things, kind of multiple issue campaigns. They're becoming more focused after the training, or compared to the control group. The treatment areas are becoming more focused in terms of demands, and that's a statistically significant change that we're observing from the citizen community. So those are the two main findings on state violence, and I think this is the kind of, I believe, but maybe I'm wrong, but the kind of the first intervention, nonviolent intervention that shows a reduction in state repression. All right, so to conclude, we may the nonviolent action and peace building training made participants use more favorable toward nonviolent action. It made participants more likely to believe that nonviolent discipline is essential for success. It made them more likely to reject violence as a form of struggle. It made participants more confident in strategic planning and in peace building tools. And it made them focus their demands more, have fewer kind of events and campaigns that had multiple issues, and it reduced state repression. But we did not appear to have changed participants' self or group confidence in their overall ability to overcome challenges that they face in their movements. And we did not have statistically significant changes in non-state actor violence or concession. In terms of next steps, we want to finish this paper on Sudan as a standalone article, and we also want to do meta-analysis of the other randomized control trials that we have in Tunisia, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. And we're also starting a new phase at USIP, where we kind of this 5-day training is actually a pretty, we think a pretty strong intervention, but it's still not a long-term engagement with activists and communities. And we think that a longer-term engagement would help us understand if there could be a move between, from personal attitudes and behaviors of leaders to changes that are at the group level, like maybe, patterns of conflict analysis or changes at the organization level and macro level change. And we're doing this longitudinal study, Venezuela, Nicaragua, new countries, like Colombia. And then we also really want to deepen the theoretical contribution of this and leverage a lot of the qualitative evidence that we're gathering in all these countries for a book project. Thank you so much.
So we'll take some questions now, but I'm just going to use my power as a chair for a moment and ask a couple of questions. One is, can you just say a little bit more about what exactly the training is? And then also who the targeted people are? Are they already activists? And then do they go on to remain activists, or is this all sort of measured at the journalist level rather than actually at like by the journalists, like events within the locality, or is it that the people who are in the workshop actually also report what they're doing in their day-to-day activities? I mean, that might clarify what the mechanism is.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so the training itself is a 5-day immersive training that is very practice oriented. It's very much a kind of learning by doing. So a lot of these theoretical concepts and kind of knowledge that we're trying to that facilitators are trying to transmit is done through exercises on power analysis, conflict analysis, engaging in peace building, so actual dialogue, in negotiation. So they learn kind of principles for like maybe half an hour in the beginning, and then they carry out a series of exercises. And then they learn, we bring in case studies, so they learn about other places where nonviolent action has happened and armed action has happened, and what kind of success stories or failed stories, to be able to understand and analyze some of these things with the same tools that they're learning. And so there's a lot happening in these trainings, but as well as just kind of community being developed between these leaders. And then who is getting trained? So these are mainly activist leaders from these communities. So these are people who are, we wanted to train people who would have an impact more than just on themselves. And so we trained about 25 people per municipality, per district. And so we wanted to have the biggest impact that we could. And so we trained people who had experience in the December movement, people from the neighborhood committees, and from even just people who are community leaders, religious leaders, etc. And we did try to have parity between men and women, although that was more difficult in some areas, had some resistance from people on the ground. And then in terms of following that, so the surveys are the only thing that the ones that follow them specifically, the ones that actually got the training. The citizen journalists are just there to report what they observe in their home municipality. So they're not reporting on the groups specifically that were trained. Okay, great. Am I calling on people or, oh.
Hey, Consuelo.
Nice, good to see you.
This is a great project. Really glad you're doing it. And I guess one of my questions is, what do you think is going on with why repression is reduced, but non-state violent isn't? Because I would guess that the main mechanism through which you'd be affecting repression is through reduction in violence. I think there might be two things happening. The first is that the lack of group confidence variable is actually impacted by people's understanding that there are a lot of different actors in their zone who are going to do a lot of different things that they can't control. And so you're seeing low confidence, high non-state violence, because that's just what it is. But at the same time, still then have to explain, why the repression is reduced. And I wonder if it has to do with defections or the potential for defections. I wonder if it also has to do with some monitoring function that the police and security services become aware is more possible with a better organized group that is more committed to nonviolent discipline and expects to be treated proportionately. And so they're more on notice. And I also wonder whether it has something to do with more focus. Yeah. Because if it's a focused protest, it looks more organized. And it's actually more politically costly to repress organized groups, movements, than it is to disperse, a sort of wild bunch of people who are just bringing the demand of the day that they came to the protest with. So those are just three things that I'd like to speculate on from your qualitative evidence. The second thing I'm just really curious about is how you actually managed to deliver like the 96 trainings. And is it correct that you're going to do 96 more trainings like later, or that's all of them?
No, it was 48 and 48.
Okay, got it. All right, but still, go on, and how do you sort of manage the quality control in the training to make sure that what everybody's getting is equivalent? Do you have any way of evaluating internally what people experience that might give you some leverage on a range of experiences that people have in these trainings?
Yep.
I also just say one thing just on the we haven't changed our confidence in our ability to do anything. I think this is a very natural response to encountering a whole bunch of information that you didn't have before, and just recognizing the more you know, the less you know. Yeah. So I'm not at all surprised that the sort of confidence that we can do this measure doesn't move. I think if anything, it would be we need to find out more what we are supposed to be doing.
Yeah. Thank you. All right, so on repression, so that's the main thing we're trying to figure out at this point is how in the world are we getting reduced repression without reduced non-state actor violence? And so all your hypotheses are potential ones. We're trying to explore this in the interview data, especially, and we want to do another round of interviews to be able to get at this. Because we were really just recently able to clean the survey data from these paper to be able to analyze them. So now we want to go back to interview and kind of have this knowledge that we find, and this is some journalist data. And so those are all possible ones. Another possibility that we were thinking of this finding is that when the facilitators go into a municipality to train people, they explicitly have like permission from the local authorities, like from the local leaders, because we don't want to put anyone at risk. And so they know that there's going to be a peace building and a nonviolent training. And so there might be some sense of, oh, okay, so maybe the actions here, it's not the intervention itself, but the fact that it is going to happen, the expectation that these people are going to be less violent. That's another possibility. So we need to have, we're trying to find data to be able to kind of tease out from all of these options. But that's another one that might have to be operative. On the, how did we conduct these? So Jawhara Kanu is one of the most amazing people that I have ever met, and that's why she's on this paper. Couldn't have done this without her. She was the leader of, all the facilitators on the ground. The facilitator cohort is extremely good. We developed the facilitators very deeply, and they gained a lot of trust with Jawhara. We work with a way association in Khartoum to be able to identify these people. We did a lot of different types of training. And in terms of quality control, so we have some knowledge questions that we ask in the survey to be able to see, like, are people getting some of the same levels of knowledge across the different trainings. We also have the table of contents. So each facilitator had to submit literally the things that they were, like, each session that they were going to have each day. So at least we have kind of the range of topics that they covered, that they could cover. And for some of them, we even have like interviews right after the training, and to have some of the insights that they had during the training. So it's not perfect. I mean, we definitely, that is a problem, that to be able to have a very kind of the same exact treatment across is just almost impossible to do in these cases. But we try to at least make sure that every topic of the SNAP guide is being covered, and for these requests, and then to make sure that knowledge is at the same level. Yeah. Can you help me with that? I don't know.